It's the TV people who run the world. And I just got orders that I'm supposed to be here, not there. Well, the last talk I gave at this forum was on a light, pleasant topic. It was about how humans are an endangered species, and they're, given the nature of their institutions, they're likely to destroy themselves in a fairly short time. So this time there's a little relief, and we have a pleasant topic instead, the new war on terror. Fortunately, the world keeps coming up with things that make it more and more horrible as we proceed. I'm going to assume two conditions for this talk. The first one is just what I assume to be a recognition of fact. That is that the events of September 11th were a horrendous atrocity, probably the most devastating instant human toll of any crime in history outside of war. The second has to do with the goal. Second assumption has to do with the goal. I'm assuming that our goal is that we're interested in reducing the likelihood of such crimes, whether they're against us or against someone else. If you don't accept those two assumptions, then what I say will not be addressed to you. If we do accept them, then a number of questions arise, closely related ones, which merit a good deal of thought. One question, and by far the most important one, is what is happening right now? Implicit in that is what we can do about it. Second, has to do with the very common assumption that what happened on September 11th is a historic event, one which will change history. I tend to agree with that. I think it's true. It was a historic event, and the question we should be asking is exactly why. The third question has to do with the title, the War Against Terrorism. Exactly what is it? And there's a related question, namely, what is terrorism? Fourth question, which is narrower but important, has to do with the origins of the crimes of September 11th. And the fifth question that I want to talk a little about is what policy options there are in fighting this war against terrorism and dealing with the situations that led to it. Say a few things about each. Glad to go beyond in discussion, or don't hesitate to bring up other questions. These are the ones that come to my mind as prominent, but you may easily and plausibly have other choices. Well, let's start with right now. I'll talk about the situation in Afghanistan. I'll just keep to uncontroversial sources like the New York Times. According to the New York Times, there are 7 to 8 million people in Afghanistan on the verge of starvation. That was true actually before September 11th. Right, they were surviving on international aid. On September 16th, the Times reported, I'm quoting it, that the United States demanded from Pakistan the elimination of truck convoys that provide much of the food and other supplies to Afghanistan's civilian population. As far as I could determine, there was no reaction in the United States, or for that matter in Europe. I was on national radio all over Europe the next day. There was no reaction in the United States or in Europe, to my knowledge, to the demand to impose massive starvation on millions of people. The threat of military strikes right after September, around that time, forced the removal of international aid workers that crippled the assistance programs. Actually, I'm quoting again from the New York Times. Refugees reaching Pakistan after arduous journeys from Afghanistan are describing scenes of desperation and fear at home as the threat of American-led military attacks turns their long-running misery into a potential catastrophe. The country was on a lifeline, and we just cut the line. quoting an evacuated aid worker in the New York Times Magazine. The World Food Program, the UN program, which is the main one by far, were able to resume after 3 weeks. In early October, they began to resume at a lower level, resume food shipments. They don't have international aid workers within, so the distribution system's hampered. That was suspended as soon as the bombing began. They then resumed, but at a lower pace, while aid agencies leveled scathing condemnations of U.S. airdrops, condemning them as propaganda tools, which are probably doing more harm than good. And that happens to be quoting from the London Financial Times, but it's easy to continue. After the first week of bombing, the New York Times reported in a back page inside a column on something else that by the arithmetic of the United Nations, there will soon be 7.5 million Afghans in acute need of even a loaf of bread, and there are only a few weeks left before the harsh winter will make deliveries to many areas totally impossible. Continuing to quote, but with bombs falling, the delivery rate is down to 1/2 of what is needed. Casual comment, which tells us that Western civilization is anticipating the slaughter of, well, do the arithmetic, 3 to 4 million people, something like that. On the same day, the leader of Western civilization dismissed with contempt, once again, offers of negotiation for delivery of the alleged target, Osama bin Laden, and a request for some evidence to substantiate the demand for total capitulation was dismissed. On the same day, the special rapporteur of the United Nations in charge of food pleaded with the United States to stop the bombing to try to save millions of victims. As far as I'm aware, that was unreported. That was Monday. Yesterday, the major aid agencies, Oxfam and other Christian Aid and others, joined in that plea. Didn't find a report in the New York Times. There was a line in the Boston Globe hidden in a story about another topic, Kashmir. Well, I could easily go on, but all of that, first of all, indicates to us what's happening. It looks like what's happening is some kind of silent genocide. It also gives a good deal of insight into the elite culture, the culture that we're part of. It indicates that what will happen, we don't know, but plans are being made and programs implemented on the assumption that they may lead to the death of several million people in the next couple of weeks. Very casually, with no comment, no particular thought about it. That's just kind of normal here and in a good part of Europe, not in the rest of the world. In fact, not even in much of Europe. So if you read the Irish press or the press in Scotland, say, that close, reactions are very different. Well, that's what's happening now. What's happening now is very much under our control. We can do a lot to affect what's happening, and that's roughly it. Let's turn to the slightly more abstract questions, forgetting for the moment that we're in the midst of apparently trying to murder 3 or 4 million people. Not Taliban, of course, they're victims. Let's go back, turn to the question of the historic event that took place in September 11th. And as I said, I think that's correct. It was a historic event. Not, unfortunately, because of its scale. Unpleasant to think about, but in terms of the scale, it's not that unusual. I did say it's the worst, probably the worst instant human toll of any crime, and that may be true. But there are terrorist crimes with effects a bit more drawn out that are much more extreme, unfortunately. Nevertheless, it's a historic event because there was a change. The change was the direction in which the guns were pointing. That's new, radically new. So it takes a U.S. history The last time that the national territory of the United States was under attack, or for that matter even threatened, was when the British burned down Washington in 1814. There have been many it was common to bring up Pearl Harbor, but that's not a good analogy. The Japanese, whatever you think about it, the Japanese bombed military bases in 2 U.S. colonies, not the national territory. Colonies which had been taken from their inhabitants in not a very pretty way. This is the national territory that's been attacked on a large scale. You can find a few fringe examples, but this is unique. During these close to 200 years, we, the United States, expelled or mostly exterminated the indigenous population, it's many million people, conquered half of Mexico, carried out depredations all over the region, Central America, and sometimes beyond, conquered Hawaii and the Philippines, killing several 100,000 Filipinos in the process. Since the Second World War, it's extended its reach around the world in ways I don't have to describe, but it was always killing someone else. The fighting was somewhere else. It was others who were getting slaughtered, not here, not the national territory. In the case of Europe, the change is even more dramatic because its history is even more horrendous than ours. We are an offshoot of Europe, basically. For hundreds of years, Europe has been casually slaughtering people all over the world. That's how they conquered the world, not by handing out candy to babies. During this period, Europe did suffer murderous wars, but that was European killers murdering one another. The main sport of Europe for hundreds of years was slaughtering one another. The only reason it came to an end in 1945 had nothing to do with democracies not making war on each other and other fashionable notions. It had to do with the fact that everyone understood that the next time they play the game, it's going to be the end for the world, because the Europeans, including us, had developed such massive weapons of destruction that game just has to be over. And it goes back hundreds of years. I mean, in the 17th century, about probably 40% of the population of Germany was wiped out in one war. But during this whole bloody, murderous period, it was Europeans slaughtering each other and Europeans slaughtering people elsewhere. The Congo didn't attack Belgium. India didn't attack England. Algeria didn't attack France. It's uniform. And there are, again, small exceptions, but pretty small in scale, certainly invisible on the scale of what Europe and us were doing to the rest of the world. This is the first change, the first time that the guns have been pointed the other way. In my opinion, that's probably why you see such different reactions on the two sides of the Irish Sea, which I've noticed, incidentally, in many interviews on both sides, national radio on both sides. The world looks very different depending whether you're holding the lash or whether you're being whipped by it for hundreds of years. Very different. So I think the shock and surprise in Europe and its offshoots like here is very understandable. It is a historic event, but regrettably not in scale, in something else. And a reason why the rest of the world, most of the rest of the world, looks at it quite differently. Not that lacking sympathy for the victims of the atrocity or being horrified by them, that's almost uniform, but viewing it from a different perspective, something we might want to understand. Well, let's go to the third question. What is the war against terrorism? And side question, what's terrorism? The war against terrorism has been described in high places as a struggle against a plague, a cancer, which is spread by barbarians, by depraved opponents of civilization itself. That's a feeling that I share. The words I'm quoting, however, happen to be from 20 years ago. That's President Reagan and his Secretary of State